New Zealand's housing market is often described as a state-sanctioned casino, but this week, the Green Party officially unveiled their 2026 election strategy to flip the table. It's called A Home for Everybody, and it's arguably the most radical housing shift that we've seen in 40 years if the policy gets implemented. In this policy audit episode, we're going to look past the sound bites. We're going to look at how the Green Party plan to pay for it using a wealth tax and address the elephant in the room. Does capping rent actually work, or does it just kill the rental market? So first, the basics. This policy has three pillars. One, a renter's rights bill that caps rent increases at 2% a year. Two, a massive public build of tens of thousands of homes. And three, a duty to assist law that makes housing a legal right that the government must provide. By their powers combined, we have the Greens housing plan. That's literally what the title of the video is all about here. But a plan this big has a massive price tag. The 2023 version was costed at around $14 billion over 5 years. This version is likely higher because there's more to it. Things cost more now as well. Thanks, inflation. So, how do you pay for a multi-billion-dollar housing revolution without blowing out the deficit? The Greens are pointing to two specific funding sources. First, that immediately reversed the current government's interest deductibility changes. That's $2.9 billion tax shift that effectively moves money from landlord tax breaks directly into the public housing fund. The second is their wealth tax. Under this plan, individuals with more than $2 million in net assets or couples with $4 million would pay a 2.5% annual tax on everything above that $2 million threshold. The Greens argue this isn't a revenue grab, it's a rebalancing. By taxing dead wealth sitting in property and shares, they claim they can generate upwards of $12 billion a year. That money doesn't just build the houses, it funds the income guarantee, ensuring that no one, renter or otherwise, is living in poverty while the houses are being built. If you open any economics textbook from 1990, it'll tell you that rent control is a disaster. The theory goes that if you cap profit, landlords sell up, supply drops, and you end up with a rental desert. But does it actually happen? There's actually multiple schools of thought on the topic. In one corner, you have social equity economists like Dr. Susan St. John. They argue that housing isn't a standard commodity like TVs or apples. It's a human right with inelastic demand. You can't just stop consuming a roof if the price goes up. They point to second-generation rent controls. These aren't the rent freezes of the 1970s that led to slums. They are a stabilization measure. The argument is that by capping increases at 2% a year, you stop predatory pricing and economic evictions. This allows families to stay in one place, which reduces the massive social costs of disrupted schooling or healthcare. To these economists and the Green Party, a stable society is a more productive society. But then you have market efficiency school of thought represented by researchers like Dr. Ryan Greenaway McGreevy. Their concern isn't that landlords are evil, but that they're rational. If the cost of rates, insurance, and repairs rises by 6% while income is capped at 2%, the house becomes a liability. They argue this leads to housing decay. Landlords stop painting the walls or fixing the leaks because the math isn't mathing. More importantly, they worry about the lottery effect. People in capped rentals never seem to move. It's why the series Friends lasted 10 years, even if the house is too big for them, because they can't afford the market rate anywhere else. This locks the market and makes it even harder for young people to find a flat. Right, then there's the second segment, which is around the wealth tax, rebalancing versus the flight model. It's basically how they're going to pay for it. The Greens want a 2.5% tax on net wealth over $2 million. So if you're one of those very few people who vote for the coalition parties who don't have $2 million in non-productive assets just sitting around, then you will be fine and completely unaffected by this. So maybe don't go simping for the millionaire class to attack this proposal just yet. I can already hear those keyboards clicking. Independent economists like Dr. Bill Rosenberg argue that this is about tax neutrality. Currently, if you work a 40-hour work week, every dollar is taxed. But if your house gains $200,000 in value while you sleep, that capital gain is largely untaxed. They argue that taxing wealth isn't a penalty, it's closing a loophole that's funneled New Zealand capital into unproductive real estate instead of new businesses. However, career economists at the Treasury have historically been very nervous about this. Their concern is something called capital flight. It's like white flight, but well, no, to be fair, it's almost exactly like white flight now that I think about it. Wealth is mobile. If a high net worth individual sees a 2.5% bite taken out of their assets every year, they might just move their tax residency to Australia or Singapore. but international data shows this doesn't tend to happen on a large scale. There's also the liquidity trap. Imagine a retired couple in Auckland. They bought their home in 1970 for 30 grand and now it's worth 3 million. They've got no cash, just a house. Under this policy, they could owe tens of thousands in tax every year. The Greens say they could defer the tax until the house is sold, but Treasury warns that this creates a massive administrative nightmare and a debt cloud over the elderly. Finally, the 40,000 home public build. The debate here is about crowding out. Opponents say the government must build because the private sector only builds high-profit luxury homes. They argue for the fiscal multiplier. For every dollar spent on public housing, you save $2 over here on future healthcare or justice costs. Critics at places like Motu Research aren't against more houses, but they do ask who's going to build them. New Zealand has a finite number of hammers and builders. If the government hires them all for state houses, the cost of private construction skyrockets, potentially making it even harder for the squeezed middle to build their own homes. So with all these schools of thought on economics of it all, is there actually a correct outlook? Honestly, the reality is actually somewhere in the middle because they're describing something known as the trade-off triangle: affordability, quality, and supply. It's almost impossible to find a model that delivers all three outcomes, and depending on the approach, there's data from other parts of the world that show that they can work, but there's always a trade-off. A 2020 Catalonia study on rent caps there, like the ones proposed here, showed an improved quality of life for tenants, but a drop of private rental supply of about 10%. Scandinavian research on wealth taxes show that we could expect about a 2% drop of super wealthy people fleeing the country instead of paying a wealth tax, but those that stay tend to find ways to still game the system a little bit by moving wealth into exempt assets, and the money still rolls in. And there are questions around capacity to deliver new housing. These trades people that are needed, they come from private builds. The resources used, the increased demand can drive up cost per unit for the entire industry. So ultimately the question becomes, which trade-off do the public prefer? Who bears what risk? In the current system, the tenants bear that risk. With unstable housing on rising costs under the Green proposal, the landlords and taxpayers bear that risk of lower but longer-term returns in funding the build program. Then there's the Renter Rights Bill, the rental warrant of fitness, the end of no-cause evictions, laws to provide security and health. We have some of the dampest rentals in the world, and that impacts the long-term health of everyone involved. A standard level of healthy compliance is a way to help ease pressure off the public health sector. Research out of the University of Otago shows the introduction of the healthy home standards led to a 19% reduction in hospital admissions for children under 2 with acute respiratory infections, and a 15% reduction in new chronic respiratory diseases in children under 15. And in places like Scotland, where they did end no-cause evictions, it created indefinite security, allowing families to put down roots and really participate in their communities. Then there's the right to a roof suite of proposals. For roughly 100,000 Kiwis experiencing some form of severe housing deprivation, this isn't just a policy, it's an emergency exit. The Greens are proposing a duty to assist law. Think of it like this: the current government tries to help you find a home. Under this law change, they would be legally required to. They're also scrapping the deserving versus undeserving labels that have crept into emergency housing. No more being turned away from a motel because of your past. The goal is to move from a system of management to a system of extinction, aiming to make homelessness a relic of the past by treating every New Zealander as legally entitled to a front door key and putting in the steps and infrastructure to make that possible with a housing first outlook. Schemes based on this model have seen huge successes in places like Hamilton over the last decade. Add into the mix an increase in funding for ancestral Māori land builds and partnership models, actively promoting Tino rangatiratanga and ensuring a universal design mandate for inclusivity purposes, making sure those with disabilities are considered in building codes. The current system is baked in flaws, but benefits the people with all the money. The Greens' proposed system creates a much better playing field for everyone, but takes resources to happen. And it's not going to be quick. It comes at a cost. More than dollars, it would reshape the construction industry, social development, and quality of life for thousands. And it would make people with millions in dead assets sad. And of course, we should always feel sorry for them, according to the Herald. According to the tweets they put out as well, while making cheap toys in China, trying to ban 16-year-olds from social media platforms and arguing nepotism doesn't exist because daddy gave me a company that builds stuff, and that doesn't mean that I'm woke or some kind of financial genius. Anyway, the Green Party's 2026 plan is a total rejection of the market knows best philosophy. It uses a wealth tax to fund massive state intervention, betting that the security of a 2% rent cap outweighs the risk of landlords leaving the sector. You could argue it's a utopian fantasy, or it's a way out of the 30-year crisis. There's a lot of debate points that could be brought up with this, and that's the whole reason why we get to decide when we go to the ballot box which option is best for us and our country. Hey, thanks for sticking around till the end of the video. While you're here, why not hit that like button or share the video or even subscribe to the channel. You could even become a paid YouTube member so you can see things released in advance, you get access to some exclusive content, and like all these awesome people, you get to have your name at the end of the credits as well.